Printing is the process of making three-dimensional solid objects from a digital file. To begin, you first need to create a 3D model using a computer-aided design software, or CAD for short. These softwares come in many forms, from industrial-grade software that costs thousands of dollars to free open-source software such as Blender. Then comes the actual printing of the model, which can take anywhere from a few hours to a few days depending on the complexity of the model. There are many different techniques to 3D printing, yet the easiest way to explain the process is printing material, which is usually a plastic filament, is drawn into the extruder, which is the core of the printer. The extruder has two main parts, a hot end and a cold end. The cold end is where the motor draws the filament in and pushes it through. The hot end is where the filament is heated until it liquefies and extruded out through the nozzle. The printer then begins to print the material in very thin layers, often only around 0.01 millimeters thick. The filament then solidifies quickly and bonds to the previous layer below it before the build platform lowers to allow for another layer to be added. This process is continued until the print is done. There are six main types of material that can be used: polymers, concrete, metals, ceramics, paper, and certain edibles such as chocolate. These materials are oftentimes in the form of wire filament, powder form, or liquid resin. In 1981, Japanese Dr. Kodama is credited with the first 3D printing attempts. He was the first to come up with a layer-by-layer approach for manufacturing. In 1984, Charles Hall invented stereolithography, or SLA for short. This is a common 3D printing technique. It uses a vat of liquid photopolymer resin and an ultraviolet laser to layer the object. Every layer, the laser beam traces a cross-section on the surface of the liquid resin. When exposed to the ultraviolet light, the pattern traced is cured and solidified, joining the layer below it. As each pattern is traced, an elevator lowers and a resin-filled blade sweeps across the cross-section, recoating it with fresh material. In the 2000s, a working 3D printed kidney was created, and in 2008, a printed prosthetic leg was created. In 2009, the patent for another type of 3D printing, called fused disposition modeling, fell into the public domain. This opened up a wave of innovation in those printers, which dropped the printer's price and allowed the technology to become more accessible. From there, it is present that in the public's mind and policymakers' decisions that the technology is forever progressing and its uses are expanding.
3D printing of concrete is an emerging, innovative, new construction method. It will be revolutionary for the construction industry in terms of productivity, profitability, in terms of cost, green construction, safety, as well as numerous other things. Uh, the first resemblance to 3D printing of concrete was in the 1950s with robotic bricklaying. The Japanese promoted this idea in the 1980s and 90s to address the danger of building high-rise buildings. The process of 3D concrete printing is started by making a computer-generated model, uh, usually in something like CAD. This pre-designed building element is then fabricated by laying two-dimensional layers of concrete on top of one another to create this three-dimensional version of the computer-generated model. 3D printed cement mix has different goals than traditionally poured concrete, and they might seem counterintuitive at first. The mix should maximize compressive strength, yet maximize workability. But when you think about it, maximizing compressive strength means reducing the amount of water, while maximizing workability involves extra water. So these are some new problems that construction people have to work with. 3D printing can be implemented for helping countries in poverty by building affordable homes in short spans of times, as well as it can be used to make buildings for disaster shelter in emergency situations.
3D printing in steel, kind of like 3D printing with plastics and carbon fiber, it's very similar in the sense of making it. It starts from the bottom up and it uses, instead of a polyfiber or plastic, it uses a powder steel glue and melting process to actually create the finished product. And the big thing about the powder steel is that the powder steel needs to be the exact same shape with each particle in order for the steel to be durable and to be structurally functional. If the shape of one particle is not to the exact specs of the other shapes, then it becomes faulty and actually can break and become actually quite brittle. And now in that measurement, we're also measuring it within microns, so it's quite small to the naked eye. But other than that, in the residential field, I think we could see 3D printing taking over the industry. João Guerrero stated that 3D printing could actually save 50% of the raw materials for each job site, which is quite amazing when you think about it. He also stated that between each house there is 2.5 to 4 tons of waste of disposable products. And with 3D printing is based solely off of recycled products. So for us to use recycled products and for the excess waste of each like beam or screwdriver to be reused again in the next object would actually help save each construction company a lot of money. So I think further down the line, I think we could see a lot of more construction firms start to adapt to 3D printing, especially in residential homes.
As exciting as the future of 3D printing is, before we invest fully, there's a few things we need clarity on, and that is cost and feasibility, environmental impact, quality compared to the current primary source of manufacturing, and obviously limitations. So when observing 3D printing and what they lack and what they don't lack, one thing that actually comes to mind when it comes to comparing manufacturing to 3D printing is that 3D printing at the current moment is actually slower than manufacturing, significantly slower in most aspects. In fact, the only aspect that they beat manufacturing in is prototype. So if you want a prototype, a 3D printer would be a much better option than traditional manufacturing due to parts, unique parts that a manufacturer uses compared to a 3D printer who doesn't need any parts at all. When it comes to large-scale production, again, 3D printing fails. So off the bat, 3D printing is taking a back seat to many different aspects that what we would require, especially in construction. Um, Another huge aspect that really kind of takes the wind out of the sails of 3D printing is the outrageous cost. Um, it actually right now costs more to 3D print certain, let's say, spare parts than say it will cost a manufacturer to do the same thing. Now I don't want to rain too hard on 3D printing's parade, but a good sign is to note that they're still in infancy. This is still something that is new and hasn't really adjusted to the current climate of industry that it needs to adapt itself to. So that's a positive sign. Now, what's less positive is the environmental impact, which actually shocked me. Currently, one thing they haven't addressed is the amount of particles that are in the air when 3D printing, and it's very dangerous. It's actually releasing into the air harmful ultraviolet particles along with toxic fumes composed of volatile organic compounds. And correctly so, you should be wearing some type of mask if dealing with 3D printers, but it's not something that's mandated. So it's an easy fix, but it should be taken care of. And finally, back to energy consumption. Fun fact of the day. Here it goes. A 3D printer consumes almost 100 times the amount of energy on average to make an equivalent item. You did not hear that wrong. But let's not panic and rush to any rash conclusions. Like I said previously, infancy, that must be stressed. They have a lot of time for growth. To answer the big question, as of now, I would say no, 3D printing is not a viable option. Futuristically, possibly, maybe. They have a point, they have a target to hit, so it's not in the realm of impossibility.